Welcome to today's webinar on building Sentinel in 1 hour. We'll go ahead and go through the agenda here. So we'll give you an overview of Sentinel. We'll discuss the prerequisites for building Sentinel. And then you'll be following along as we actually go through all the steps. Just by way of introduction, my name is Joe Stocker. I'm the founder and CEO of Patriot. So I started Patriot almost 10 years ago and have written a book on securing Microsoft 365. I also help lead our managed Sentinel practice, which is 24/7 XDR service offering. And I'm joined today by Lamar Ano. Lamar, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nice to have you on today. My name's Lamar Ano. Been working in Microsoft Consulting for several years. It's a passion of mine, especially around the Sentinel area. It's been a fun learning experience and always learning something new.
A little bit more about Patriot. So we are a Microsoft cybersecurity partner. We partner very closely with Microsoft. It's the only partner we have, and they've ranked us one of their top 3 partners in the US based on the number of projects that we've completed, about 2,000 since 2015. Last year, we deployed over 4 million seats of the Defender XDR stack. And on average, we're helping close to 400 clients per year. And we do offer a 24/7 SOC. So if you, for example, build Sentinel and you need help after hours or weekend, or even frankly during the day, but we do offer a weekend and after hour coverage plan as well. But we can help monitor your Sentinel that you build. Lamar, would you mind just giving us a high-level overview of what kind of stuff feeds into Microsoft Sentinel, especially as it relates to what Microsoft refers to as their XDR service?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So yeah, Sentinel is your single pane of glass for all things in the Microsoft Defender suite, as well as your Azure side of the house. So if we notice here, right, we have all the SaaS apps come into Defender for Cloud apps. We have M365, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity. That's kind of your Defender stack. You can, of course, see these things in your Defender XDR portal. There's some interesting and exciting things happening on the combination of Sentinel and XDR these days too, which we can get to later. We also have the Entra ID side of the house, where it's your proactive protections on your identities. So all that can flow into your Defender XDR. But then we also have all the Azure stuff, right? Your VMs, your cloud, your SQL, your app services. Those things also generate alerts. Those alerts need to be managed. They need to be investigated and preferably automated as well. So those things are powered by Defender for Cloud. But then really the main way to deal with those, the best way, is to make sure they come over to Sentinel. And that's where you have all of your supporting data as well. You can have correlation across identities, endpoints, cloud, and you can really see the full picture of an entire incident from one spot.
Awesome. So walk us through like a typical security event and how that would kind of play out in Sentinel.
Yeah, so this is a great slide for that. As we know, most attacks start with email. So there's an email that comes in. That's where we have our Defender for Office, right? Can start tracking that, hopefully blocking it right at the beginning. If that doesn't happen, something gets clicked on, and there's something that gets installed on an endpoint. That endpoint can either be, for example, a user's laptop, or it could be a VM in Azure. So depending on where that's at, you have Defender for Cloud, you have Defender for Endpoint there to catch that as well. Moving on, if that user's identity gets compromised, you'll have Defender for Identity. That's where we can track your Active Directory side of the house to see what type of lateral movement attempts they're having, what are they doing with those identities. You also have across the top there Defender for Cloud apps. So did they access sensitive data? Did they exfiltrate it? Another path is, instead of Active Directory, if they come in from the Entra side, that's that top gray area there, we have identity protection there as well. So that's another area that we can block and make sure that we stop them at that level. And you have Defender for IoT. So it's growing and growing a new area of attacks for a lot of bad actors. So Defender also can integrate into your IoT and OT environments. And if an incident touches all of these, you'll get the entire picture right from Sentinel. So of course, we want to block it proactively, but this paints the entire picture for us.
Got it. So the XDR stack, it's all the prevention capabilities as well as detection capabilities, and then that's flowing into Microsoft Sentinel, which is a SIEM solution. What about third-party sources? How do we get those in?
Yeah, so if it produces logs, we can bring it in, right? So depending on the third party itself, many third parties are giving us access to APIs where Sentinel can go and pull the logs. That makes it pretty easy. Generate an authorization, a key, and depending on the vendor, may need a couple more pieces of data. And once we have that, we pull data in. There's another way of doing it is through your, if they produce syslog or CEF type data, those are more commonly used for things like firewalls, switches, and those types of things. If it produces those data, we can use a syslog forwarder to then install ARC and the AMA agent on there, and that will forward them off to Sentinel in a secure manner, 443 encrypted over the internet to Sentinel. You can also do it a couple other ways, but you can do it via private space as well. So there's tons of options. However that log gets created, even if it's a flat file somewhere, Sentinel can pick it up. Your machines produce files, we can bring those in. So wherever the log happens to be created or exist, we can grab it.
So today, just for, building out Sentinel, getting data to flow, we'll show you how to pull data in using just the native data connectors from the XDR stack. So the Azure activity logs, we'll show you how to bring in all of these, XDR components. So those will come in. Show you how to bring in the Office 365 logs. And so these are currently the free sources, right? The alert data. We'll also bring in the Microsoft intro logs. We'll show you how to do that. And so that'll kind of get you started today with your Sentinel setup. Now you'll notice Microsoft Sentinel sits on top of what's called a log analytics workspace. So that'll be the very first thing we create today. That's kind of this is the solution that pulls all the logs into it. And then Sentinel is kind of that solution that reasons over it and also provides security orchestration and response and automation. So we'll kind of walk through that today as well. So some of the prerequisites to build your Sentinel environment, you will need an active Azure subscription. If you don't have one, we'll paste this link here in the chat for you to be able to get started and create one. But this will be a prerequisite. And again, don't worry if you don't have that Azure subscription right this moment. Again, this meeting is recorded, so you can simply, when you get the recording, you can then follow along. But if you wanted to, you can actually check out this quick start, great little guide to get your Sentinel up and running. So we'll kind of start there today. If you want to bring in the Microsoft audit logs from, say, SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams and email, then you will need a global administrator account to a Microsoft tenant. Now, if you don't have a lab tenant, or if you're okay in installing in production, since again, this is just read only, we're just getting the logs, we're not going to affect anything in your production environment, then you can certainly do that with your production environment. So if you do follow the principle of least privilege, the role-based access controls, at a minimum within your Azure subscription, you're going to need the contributor role at the subscription level in which Microsoft Sentinel Workspace is going to reside. So that would be like one permission. Now, If you spin up your own kind of lab environment and you have an Azure subscription created, you're already going to have the owner permission. So this principle of least privilege is just for those of you that really need to follow very strict, permission modeling. You'll need the Sentinel contributor or Microsoft Sentinel reader permissions on the resource group that the workspace, the log analytics workspace, belongs to. So those are the prereqs. So today, we're going to show you how to set up Sentinel, which consists of creating a log analytics workspace, adding Sentinel on top of that workspace. Then we're going to start to show you how to pull data in using the Content Hub, which is kind of like a catalog of over 300 different sources. So if you have like Palo Alto or Fortinet or Cisco, those kinds of connectors, you can pull those in there. We'll show you how to manage the data connector, and then deploying the analytic rules is typically the next step. We'll also show you how to enable the user and entity behavior analytics and anomaly detections. We'll go over some KQL basics and some basic incident management, and then some reporting basics. So that's really what's on the agenda for today. So to get started, to set up Microsoft Sentinel, you'll browse to portal.azure.com. And again, feel free to follow along. So I'm here in portal.azure.com. So up in the top, you'll type in Sentinel, and you'll search for Microsoft Sentinel. You'll notice I have a couple of these lab environments already here, but for you, it should be probably blank unless you've also got one created. So you're going to go and click on Create. And the first thing that you're going to do is create a new workspace, because again, Sentinel sits on top of log analytics. You'll choose your subscription that hopefully you have access to. If not, you'll need to create a subscription. And again, you'll follow that quick start guide that we put in the chat for you. We do recommend creating a resource group, a fresh, clean resource group for this to be created in. So we'll give it like a acronym like RG, and then Sentinel Lab 3. Okay, and of course you can follow your own naming convention there. And so that's the name of the resource group. And then the log analytics workspace, I'll call it like log analytics, Sentinel Lab 3. And then we'll just go ahead and click on Review and Create. Now, creating this log analytics workspace should only take 10 seconds or so. Should be pretty quick. You can kind of monitor the progress here. Once this gets created, we'll actually go back to Sentinel, and then we'll add Sentinel into this log analytics workspace.
Yeah, and Joe, so starting this here gives us the 30-day free trial, right?
That's a great point. So you'll have 31 days to evaluate. And one of the very first things we're going to do is we're going to show you how to enable a data cap, because one of the really important things during your 31-day free trial is you want to make sure that you're not exceeding what is free. So what's free is they're going to give you the first 10 gigs per day of ingestion. So we can set a cap so that Sentinel will stop ingesting data once it reaches the 10 gig. That way you don't get any surprise charges. Now, once you're ready to go into production, obviously you'll want to, remove that cap, so that way you're able to get, all the alerts that you need to. But yeah. So to set the cap, you go down to, in your log analytics workspace, you go to usage and estimated costs. Then you go to daily cap. You'll turn on the cap, and this is because we haven't created the Sentinel instance on it. So I skipped one step. So inside of Sentinel, when we go back to Sentinel, we're going to now create Sentinel, and we're going to put it on top of that log analytics workspace, and then we'll be able to create the data cap. So I'm going to go ahead and go to create here. I'm going to choose that new workspace that I created in the previous step. I'm going to click add. Again, this should take about 7 to 10 seconds here. It's pretty quick for this to get created, to get added into that. Okay, that's done. Now, in order to get to the data cap section, we're going to go down to settings at the bottom. Then we're going to click on workspace settings, usage and estimated costs, daily cap. Now we can turn on that daily cap. Okay, so we're going to set it to 10 gig. So that'll be the cap. Another thing kind of worth pointing out is the retention policy. So by default, when you first create log analytics, it's going to retain your logs for 30 days. But Microsoft actually gives you an additional 60 days for free when you're using Sentinel on top of log analytics. So to take advantage of that, just bump that up to 90. There's no additional fee to do that. So that is a good practice to take advantage of. And if you have any regulatory requirements, you may need to go longer. So for example, PCI, the payment card industry, last I checked, they want you to keep your security logs for 1 year, so that you'd go ahead and bump that up. Now, once you go above 90 days, there are some additional costs for log retention past 90 days, and you could read about that in the Learn More link there, but I'll just go ahead and set that to 90. Okay, so we've got our data cap set. Now, what we want to talk about next is now that we've created the log analytics workspace, we've enabled Sentinel, we've set the data cap and the retention policy. The next step is to import some content from the Content Hub. Now, what we recommend enabling are what are called the always free data sources. So your Azure activity logs, your Office 365 audit logs, which include SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams, and the security alerts from the Microsoft Defender XDR stack. So all of these Defender XDR products, all the alerts from these products, those are all free. So in the Content Hub, you'll search for each of these. So Azure Activity, Microsoft 365, Defender XDR, and then you'll just simply click the install button, and that'll start pulling that data in, or at least getting the connector installed. There's a second step to pull the data in, but let's start there. So we're going to find the Azure audit logs first by going over to, again, back into Sentinel. We'll refresh here. We'll get into our new lab. And this is where it's telling you the free trial's been activated. You'll have some time, and we set that capped, so no worries there. So we go down to Content Hub, and we'll go ahead and search for the Azure Activity, which is shown here. We'll go ahead and install that. It should take about 5 seconds or so to install. It's usually pretty quick. That's installed. Now we're going to look for the Microsoft 365. And this one's pretty quick as well. Should be about 5 seconds or so. Go ahead and install that. And while this is installing, you'll notice some details in the Content Hub. This particular content pack includes 15 analytics rules, a data connector, 21 hunting queries, and 3 workbooks. We're going to discuss analytic rules and workbooks here in a moment. But installing the Content Hub basically creates a data connector. And data connectors, we'll go and configure those in a moment. We have one more to configure here, which is the Defender XDR component. So we'll go ahead and install this. Say install.
Yeah, and a common thing there, Joe, is clients will ask, well, just by installing that, are the logs flowing now? What would we say to that?
Yeah, so we need to go into the connector and configure each of those connectors, and that allows you to choose, like we were talking about before, when we're configuring this this XDR connector, if we want the only the free data sources. We need to make sure we only get the security alerts and maybe not like the raw data from, say, Defender for Endpoint. So the raw data, like the registry changes, the network events, that stuff's not free, but the alerts coming from Defender for Endpoint would be free. So that next step that Lamar's kind of bringing up there, that's what we'll configure next. Now I want to bring in a fourth connector that I feel is pretty important. So the Microsoft Entra ID connector. This is super important because most of the alerts that we're investigating in our SOC typically are attacks against the identity. So I do recommend bringing this one in. Now, just be advised, the data from Microsoft Entra ID is not free after your 31-day free trial. During your 31-day free trial, there's no cost to this. But after that, if you're continuing to use Sentinel, you'll need to look at the costs for this table, which you can do under settings. It'll show you the cost, but that'll be something to kind of keep in mind here. But I'm going to go ahead and install the Microsoft Entra ID connector because I do feel like that one's pretty important. That's going to give us our sign-in logs, our different attacks against the identity. You'll notice that there's 63 analytics rules that come with this particular connector. Okay, so let's actually go in and configure a data connector here. So in the data connectors, the ones that we've installed are showing here. So if I wanted to configure, for example, the Microsoft Entra ID, come in here to open the connector page. It's going to check our permissions, make sure that we have permissions to the tenant that we're bringing the sign-in data from. Of course, that makes perfect sense. And then you also do need access to the Microsoft Entra diagnostic settings. So you would come in here and check all these boxes to enable that connector. Similarly, you'll go through each of these connectors and you'll check the boxes if you want to bring in the Exchange logs, the SharePoint logs, the team logs, you'd hit apply, and then it's going to start bringing in that log data. So just kind of repeat that for each of these, go through them, enable the settings on those. And once the data is flowing, the next thing to do, if we kind of go back to our menu here, is to deploy the analytic rules and UEBA. So let's actually talk about that. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and go down to settings, and I'll show you where the UEBA is. So user and entity behavior analytics. This is going to let you know that there's anomalies related to a user or an entity's behavior. It's using machine learning models. It's looking at peer analysis, blast radius, and it's really great at detecting behavioral anomalies. So you just simply come in here and you click the set button, and then you come in and enable it for the sources. So once you turn it on, in our case, we're using Microsoft Entra ID as a cloud-only kind of tenant. If you do use Defender for Identity against your on-premise Active Directory, then you can go ahead and check Active Directory as well. Okay, you would hit apply, and then you enable these. That effectively enables these log sources for UEBA. You'll notice anomalies is already on by default there. So now we get into the topic of analytics rules. Now, what is an analytic rule? If we come over here to the templates, what we're noticing here is we've got already 63 analytic rules, but they're all off by default. Notice that they're not enabled. So there's two ways to get these enabled. You can kind of go through them one by one and enable them. So if I can select one like login attempts to disabled accounts. So if I create this rule because I want to be notified if someone's attempting to sign into a disabled account, I have an opportunity to review what's going to happen. Now, by default, Microsoft kind of assigns their own severity levels. So they're going to say that if somebody signs into a disabled account, that's a medium. Now you can override that here as you're publishing this rule if you like. You also notice that it's indexed against the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So this is kind of a lexicon of hacker techniques and tactics. And there's a purpose for doing this mapping so that you can visualize it later, which we'll show you how to do. But then the analytic rule is using KQL, so Kusto query language, to search the logs for certain behavior. So it's looking at, as an example, for sign-in events where the result type is 50057, which means the user account is disabled. So someone is attempting to sign into disabled accounts, and then it's summarizing that and mapping that. So when the security analyst goes in to look at the incident later, the log data is then mapped to entity data for easy triaging for the analyst. Now, you'll notice by default, the query would run every 1 day, but you can override that and have that run as frequently as, say, every 5 minutes. If you need it to run more frequently than every 5 minutes, you can do so by simply querying or copying this data. So I can copy this. I can hit cancel, and I can create my own what's called a near real-time query. So a near real-time, instead of running it on a scheduled basis, like every 5 minutes, a near real-time query rule is going to run it nearly instantaneously. So I can say, notify if someone signs into a disabled account, right? I go next, and then here I paste the query, validates the query, and then on the incident, notice that I don't run it every 5 minutes because it's simply going to run in near real time. Now, I believe you can have up to 50 near real-time rules in any one instance, so use them carefully because you only have 50. Whereas the scheduled rules, you can have up to 512 of these. And we're not even scratching the surface with the 63 that we've imported from the Content Hub. But if I want to go back and finish the sequence of getting this thing published here, let's say I was satisfied with running it every 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and go next. And then you'll notice your automated response. If this was the kind of activity that you wanted something to happen, like, hey, I wanted to send me a Teams message or an email whenever that event occurs, this is where you would actually have an automation rule be applied, based on that activity. So that can just kind of run behind the scenes. Other automation rules that you might consider would be, if this was some kind of a malware incident, maybe you want to automate, disabling, isolating that machine or running an A/B scan or something like that. So a bunch of stuff you can automate. Lamar will kind of go through automation here. Once I finish up my sequence, I'll hand it over to him. He'll kind of show how to create a playbook and how that ties in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, it would be pretty tedious to go through all 63 one at a time to activate all of them. That'd be kind of tedious, right? So what we've done here is we've actually found a script where you can now mass enable those analytic rules. I created a URL shortener link that actually takes you to this full article. So for the purposes of this, which I knew I had a security audience here, that they wouldn't just click on any old URL shortener, but let me go ahead and paste that into the chat here for you all. Okay, so what we just pasted into the chat allows you to mass enable all of those analytic rules that that you have there. So deploying those analytic rules, enabling the UEBA, that's kind of that step. Now, we showed you some KQL, and we showed you the fact that the analytic rules are based on KQL. So it's pretty important to know, KQL and how to work with incidents, right? So if we hop over into the Sentinel portal, we'll kind of show you a couple of basics here. So if I go into logs, once your connectors are up and running, you can now interact directly with the logs that are being imported. So for example, if I kind of look at the schema here, I've got my audit logs, my sign-in logs, my URL click events. So if somebody clicks on a link in their email, we have a record of that link click. And that could be really, really useful when we're trying to scope a incident response. You know, how many other people clicked on that same link? We'll show you how to identify that. So we're looking at all the logs that the data connectors are bringing into Sentinel. And then, so these are kind of the raw tables that you can actually, query against natively. Now, what are some examples of a query? Well, if I'm querying like the security incidents, so you put in the name of the table, you put in this pipe command, kind of like PowerShell, right? And then I can use something like count, right? Now, how would I know the syntax? How would I know how this all works? There is a simple mode, so I don't have to know necessarily the query language. I can go to simple mode, and this actually allows me to build out a query using the query builder. So I can actually just kind of select a table. So I'll pick, audit logs. I can then just jump in here and actually interact with simple mode in this way. And so I can actually change, okay, I want the last 30 minutes, and I want to do limits, and I want to add some filters. So I can maybe do some aggregation here. Maybe I want to sum a particular, or grab a particular display name and do a count by that, right? So if you don't know the KQL syntax, the simple mode is new. It allows you to kind of add your own filtering, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. If you want to learn a little bit more about Sentinel, we've uploaded a couple of resources. So one of the resources that we put was this PowerPoint that we're actually going through. And on one of the slides here are some of the resources to learn Kusto query language. So there's a great resource, Rod Trent's Must Learn KQL link. There's a kind of a gamified site that is called KC7 Cyber. So Patriot is actually a corporate sponsor. We pay for the Azure costs for this, and it allows you to kind of go in there, kind of like a capture the flag game to learn KQL. Really fantastic for security operations folks that need to learn Kusto query language. And then kind of the de facto standard of learning KQL is this book that came out called The Definitive Guide to KQL, which you can get on Amazon. But let me go ahead and show you an example of the first one, the Must Learn KQL. So when you, and I'll put this in the chat here for you as well, for you to navigate to. Okay, that is now in the chat. So, must learn KQL. So I showed you the count operator, we had just used that. So you can either read the article or you can watch the video. But if I click on the count operator, I can scroll down, and he explains the syntax of how the count operator is used, and how exactly that functions. Really nice samples, right? So I can actually, grab the sample here, I can copy that, and I could just paste that right in KQL mode. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And so it's, let me go ahead and clear. Oh, okay, security event. So security event is a table for on-premise Active Directory, which I'm not bringing into this lab. But if I want to get into, the sign-in logs, or the result type, zero, summarize count, or just count. So last 24 hours, 16,000, successful. So 0 is success. Another type of successful sign-in is actually the keep me signed in. So keep me signed in is an event of $5014. And that's kind of important because if you're only querying on 0, which are successful sign-ins, but you're not querying on keep me signed in events, you actually won't get the full count. So 16776, and I run that again, 16806. So you could see there would have been additional sign-ins I would have missed. So there is some kind of inside baseball you need to know when you're querying specific log tables. Now, how would you know that? You need to essentially be very comfortable with this take 10 operator. So take 10 allows you to query a table and get the first 10 rows, and then you can kind of inspect the content of that data, right? So I can now get much more familiar with, every element that's in there. And then another kind of tip is if you're not familiar with the different type of fields for a particular column, you can summarize the column using using the summarize function. You can actually summarize a column, and it will give you, okay, 16,000 sign-ins that were successful, but what are all these other event types? Well, we can actually find out by adding the result description. So now we can actually get to know our table a little bit better, right? So we've got, a conditional access policy required a compliant device. Okay, that's code 53000. So again, this allows you to kind of explore with it a little bit. Once you understand the KQL, and let's say you wanted to get a sign-in result where the location was like in Russia or something, right? So you can actually do something where we go back. So where the time generated is greater than, say, 90 days ago. And we want to maybe where the location is equal to Russia. Now we'll get a couple hits here, but it's important to find out if these are successful hits. So we have 3 hits, 3 sign-in attempts in the last 90 days from Russia, but we need to find out, are those successful or not? So now we add that summarize to the end. And so here we can see those 3 sign-in attempts from Russia are invalid password attempts. So there were attempts, but they failed to successfully sign in. So now you might, take that, and maybe you actually go to your analytic rule, and you want to create a new analytic rule whenever there are, successful sign-ins from Russia. So you go next, paste your syntax in here, where the result type is 0, or result type is 5014. Keep me signed in. Okay. And then you map the resulting entities so that later on when we show you the investigation, you want to be able to map the entity ID to a user so that it actually shows up for the person investigating it. User principal. Okay. You would click next, and you'd schedule this to run, and then this would send you an alert anytime that happened. So that's an example of, the benefit of working with the logs and the KQL, building those analytic rules. At Patriot, we've actually built over 200 of our own custom rules because based on our testing, even though the out-of-the-box ones are pretty good, when you actually use the MITRE ATT&CK to kind of map out where your holes are, this is effectively kind of showing you, show me all of my analytic rules and how does that relate to the coverage of MITRE ATT&CK, right? You'll notice that the out-of-the-box rules, there's a gap on maybe detecting inter-process communication or shared modules or browser extensions. So this would kind of inform your team, okay, maybe we need to write an analytic rule where a browser extension is getting abused or where a bits job is firing. You know, bits jobs can be used to download content from the internet as a dropper to bring in malware onto an endpoint. So that's why we had to build our own custom analytic rules to kind of fill some of these gaps. So let's kind of take a step back here and see where we are. So we talked about, you know, using KQL to look for, you know, sign-ins. We talked about using the summarize and count. We looked at, you know, detecting sign-ins from Russia. This one's kind of interesting. Show me where people traveled to 2 different countries in the same day. And in this particular case, you can also look for specific countries as well. You can also look for email events. So this one might be kind of interesting. Show me all the email events where this particular recipient who had more than one or at least one attachment or at least you know, one hyperlink where a URL was clicked, and tell me the domain names that were clicked on. So that might be a fun one to kind of play with here. So we'll go ahead and grab that syntax. And you can follow along too if you have that data flowing in your tenant. We'll go into our logs, onto KQL mode, create a new query here. Okay. So a let statement, it's kind of like a join statement. We're basically creating this variable called emails. So show me all the email events and return the network message ID, which is the unique identifier for the messages where Joe received an email containing at least one attachment and at least one hyperlink. Show me where those were clicked on. So where the network message ID in this click events table is actually from this variable. And then from that, then send it over to the email URL info table. And again, show me information. Give me the domain names that were clicked on. So you can then run that. And so here's some of the URLs that this recipient clicked on. So maybe clicked on, you know, looks like a meeting in Teams and some domains. And this could be kind of helpful if you wanted to know, well, who else other than Joe, you know, maybe clicked on, you know, one of these domains. So you can then, you know, basically copy this and, you know, add an additional where clause here, right? So where the domains is equal to this. Then you remove the recipient. So in theory, this should tell me anyone in the organization who also clicked on that link. And just me, apparently. But yeah, so that's the, you know, an example of, you know, interacting with identities, interacting with email. The power of this XDR, you know, Sentinel kind of sitting on top of this is that you can literally query, you can write one KQL query that can look for an email that made it onto an endpoint where the identity was then compromised. So you could actually construct a KQL to query all those tables in the same query and then build an analytic rule to, you know, send you an alert when that occurs. So when an incident is created, you're going to find that in Sentinel. So if you're a SOC analyst, you're going to work, most of your day is going to be over here in incidents. So here's a couple incidents that were created. So, you know, incident handling basic. You might come in here and say, okay, well, here's a multi-stage incident on an endpoint. So as an analyst, here's the entities that I was showing you during the analytic rule creation that you map. So it's kind of important when you're writing a KQL query that you map that to an entity so that the analyst, when they're looking at it, they can very quickly summarize, what's involved. Okay, there's the desktop involved. They can click on it, learn more information about that desktop. So if I go to view full details here, I can see what's involved. So all the entities in this incident are going to be shown here in a list. So I can quickly kind of see, okay, there's a process, a file hash, and a hyperlink, but what's kind of the full story? Like what actually happened here? Now you could click investigate and it will kind of give you a big picture. So especially if there's, multiple machines involved, you can kind of see, how everything was kind of connected. That's kind of helpful. And for each of these things, you can actually drill in and correlate and query off that data. You can really kind of do quite a bit of pivoting here too in an investigation. But what we often do is we like to investigate this in the Defender XDR portal. And I think less than a year ago, this portal got unified with Sentinel so that you no longer really start your day in Sentinel anymore. You basically start your day in this XDR portal. That way you don't have to click on this button, investigate in Defender, because that would mean you'd have to swap back and forth between your XDR software and the SIM. Now you can stay in XDR, and you'll notice that Sentinel is now natively integrated inside of the Microsoft Defender XDR portal. So I can work all of my incidents now in this unified portal. I don't have to come back here. I can actually stay here. Back to this event. So if I click on these URLs and go, okay, well, what is QQ.com, right? So I looked it up. It's actually a Chinese kind of instant messaging software. But why is this Intel process involved in communicating with this? So if you click on the actual attack story, so there's a URL visited, there's communication here. But if I want to really drill in, and this is really the power of the XDR, and really kind of a different story here. But if I wanted to actually see more details about the process and investigate this, you're able to click on this, and then you'll be able to see that this process launched, but then the network filter detected this communication, and then it was blocked, which is cool, right? It's great that the XDR software didn't like the fact that this process attempted to make an outbound communication with a pretty weird, Chinese, service, a instant messaging service. Now from here, you could run a playbook, and this would be a good segue over to Lamar. If I run this playbook, that allows me to maybe kick off a isolation, right? Where I can isolate this endpoint. Technically, I can do it here as well. If I go back into the device, I can click on the actions, and I can click on isolate device. So I could do it right here. But if I had a playbook of maybe other steps, like maybe I wanted to, create a ticket in my ServiceNow or my ticketing system, send a Teams message. Maybe there's a bunch of things I always want to do. That's why we call it a playbook. For sure, I could isolate it here, or I can run this kind of sequence of events. And so those, the automation rules inside of Sentinel, they can be used to suppress noisy alerts, but they can also be used to run playbooks. So where you would find that in Sentinel is if you go back out to automation, you'll notice that Sentinel comes with a bunch of kind of templates here. So you don't have to create them from scratch, right? So you can actually enrich the incident with virus total information. So I don't have to then leave and browse to a different site to look up QQ.com. I can look up the IP in abuse IPDB. I can send an email. I could, block the user from signing in. I can revoke their sign-in sessions, or I can create my own kind of custom automation rule. But Lamar, let me hand it over to you, maybe a quick demo of, a playbook and kind of what that looks like.
Perfect. Sounds good, Joe. Let me cue that up here. So with automation, there's kind of two components to it. You have what are the automation rules. Automation rules, I consider these your orchestration. So what things do we want to happen automatically and under what conditions? So for example, if we were to say, we want something to run when an incident is created, the severity is high. You can get as specific as you want here with your conditions. You could also do, title contains AITM, or in the middle, right? You could be real specific as to when you want this to fire off automatically. Then you have the actions that it can do. So the most powerful one is run playbook. Aside from that one, these other ones are things that happen within the Sentinel incident itself. You can change the status, severity, owner, etc. But in this case, we'd want to say run a playbook, and I'll show you a little bit more about playbooks in a sec. But the point I want to make here is that you can run multiple playbooks in a row as well. So that really shows the power of that orchestration. So maybe we want to block the user, and then we also want to revoke the sessions, right? So we want to do both of those in sequence when something like this happens. You also have when this rule expires, if you want to put that, and the order. They do fire off in order, and any rule that meets the criteria of your conditions will be fired off. So again, automation is that orchestration, what happens and when automatically. Your playbooks are more of that containerized logic flow of things that you want to happen. So you get more complex and more rich type of responses in here. So for example, if you want to look in here, I have a couple examples. I like to tinker in here quite a bit. So there's this one here for Defender that let's say we want to isolate the device and run an antivirus scan in one step. So you can set that up. So the nice thing is that Sentinel playbooks are built on logic apps from Azure. It's a well-established, well-known platform, been around for many years. So the fact that Sentinel can leverage that is amazing. So we have a very mature automation platform here. It has all sorts of things. You could do for each loops on each incident. You could do conditions. So you could see I built this one out with a little bit of error handling. So if any of these steps fail, then I have a branch that would then add comments to the incident, letting me know what was succeeded, what failed, and sending an email down at the bottom. And to your point, Joe, you can also integrate many other third parties in here. So if I wanted to create something in ITSM, we have Jira, we have ServiceNow. If we wanted to send any type of email or Teams, or if we're using Slack instead of Teams, there's just tons and tons of integrations out there since this has been around for so long. So this is one example. This is a kind of a device related response. There's also things that you could do, like we mentioned earlier, around disabling accounts, resetting passwords, sending emails, sending Teams messages. So really the sky's the limit on what you can do here with playbooks.
No, it's really a great kind of walkthrough. I think what's great is that Sentinel is pretty affordable compared to third-party solutions where you have to buy a separate security orchestration, service and try to integrate that, plug that in. This is all just natively, inside of Sentinel, so it's super clean, right? So let me go ahead and kind of wrap it up a little bit here today, and definitely want to thank everyone for attending. If you have any questions, please shoot us an email, and hope you all have a wonderful day.